Hi, I'm Sami, and this is the Career Kickstart Show. Today's episode, we are drilling down into the healthcare field. I'm excited because I have Melissa McClung on my show. No, it's actually Melissa McClung, which I remembered that because I was like, that is very apt because she is in the healthcare field, because I'm a 2-year-old and I'm like, the lung goes in the body. Thank you, Melissa, for being on my show, because today's episode, we're going to really kind of go on into what people who are in the healthcare field, what issues they face on the job hunt, how, with healthcare, medicine, science, those sort of fields, how they can figure out how to become unstuck, happy, and valued in their career, whether that's through a strategic job hunt or, figuring out what is actually the right thing for you. So, Melissa, now that we kind of get all the awesome that you're going to bring in the table, how about you kind of introduce yourself and just tell us how you came to be a career coach, because that's not what you started out as.
Yeah, so I appreciate that. So I have been doing career coaching now since 2012, and I got started with it because when I was 16, actually, I decided I wanted to be a child psychologist, and I did all the right things. So I went to school and I got my bachelor's degree, and I graduated at the top of my class, and I worked for a year working with at-risk kids, and then I went to graduate school and, finished my first year of graduate school with the 4.0, started my second year of graduate school. And for those of you that don't know, the second year of graduate school is really the first time you get to actually work with clients. And so I get into my practicum, and at this point, I am 5 years into a 6-year education, $40,000 into a $60,000 education. And I found out that not only do I not really love working with at-risk kids, I'm not actually particularly good at it. And I'm kind of competitive in that way. And I figured that if I was going to do something for the next 30 to 40 years, I really wanted to be good at it. So as it turned out, I happened to have a internship at the same time in the University Career Center, which, Sami, honest to God, I took because it was paid. Like, I really only took it because it was paid. But on the first day of training, our supervisor there, Wendy Shoemaker, said, she's like, my goal in having this internship is to turn you all into career counselors. And I laughed. I really did. I really laughed because I did not think that was even going to be possible. And here I am, 8 years later, still doing the career counseling thing. And I really fell in love with it. I really enjoy helping people who come to me when they're stressed out and they're worried, they're overwhelmed, they're stuck. And I'm able to give them enough knowledge that they can get out of their own way. So that's really what I find the most fascinating and beautiful about career counseling, and that's kind of why I do it.
Wow, I like that you had an internship that actually did its purpose. Like,
Right.
that's refreshing to me. You weren't like picking up coffee. You pretty much were like, wow, this is formational. And you know what? The thing is that I've also worked with at-risk youth and everything. One of my positions before was an employment specialist at a nonprofit, and it's difficult work. It's
It
not
is.
easy. I eventually got out because I had, I guess they call it compassion fatigue. I like to say that my fuck it bucket was empty. I was just like, it's not fair to me. It's not fair to the kids. But it takes an emotional maturity to realize that, because there's a lot of people who will stick with it because they're like, they have what do they call it? The gamblers have like the investment fallacy. They're like, well, I'm already 40 grand into this. I got to keep going and be miserable for the rest of my life because I made this bet. So I commend you for making your bed, lying in it, being like, this ain't a good fit, and then just remaking the thing. I think that's a sign of just a good person in their career and a good coach. But I digress on that because
actually, that's exactly how most of my clients end up coming to me in the first place. Is they did that. Is they just powered through it, like you were talking about.
Yeah, and it seems like with the medical field that it is definitely one that you really can't power through. Like, I mean, you can do that, like, if you are like working, at a bookshop, like lives aren't really on the line if you are like apathetically, selling people Nora Roberts books. But in healthcare, you might need to give a darn, right? Am I incorrect on that?
Well, healthcare actually is a really broad field, and it's a really broad word to be using. So, I mean, obviously, when you're talking about people who are working as a doctor or as a nurse, those people typically are not apathetic. Whenever I work with folks in those particular professions, apathy typically isn't the problem as much as that if they come to me, it's because the work just doesn't fit their life anymore. It's a little too demanding, and they're hoping to find something that still uses all of their skills and experience, but just doesn't require them to work like 80 hours a week or 12-hour shifts or something like that.
Yeah.
But healthcare itself encompasses everything from physical therapy and occupational therapy to physicians and nurses to healthcare broader of a field. There are a lot of people in those roles that they're very successful. They're good at what they do, but they just don't love it anymore. And those are really my people.
Okay, no, that's a good point. And thanks for educating me on the fact that there's so much going into this, because I'm always thinking like Grey's Anatomy, so like sexy, orderlies and stuff. But we have a lot more going on in this field. How about you talk a little bit about kind of for the people who kind of go into the field, what they need to maybe know, and then talk about the folks who want to either get out or switch up what they're doing. Kind of, I know that that's a big question, but like start me off on like what can be some opportunities for folks in the field, and then for the folks maybe wanting to maybe switch it up later on.
Yeah. So I think that it's important to remember that healthcare is a really strong industry. And I think that's why a lot of people are drawn to it. So, healthcare is one of those things that we all need. It is a growing field. There are a lot of opportunities there. The current political climate is favorable for that work, and there are changes that are being made all the time. But a lot of the work in healthcare can't be automated. There is some that is being automated, but not all of it can be. And because of that, it means it's pretty stable. So over time, healthcare is actually a really good, stable profession, and it's something that people are drawn to a lot. But whenever I'm giving anyone advice, whenever they are thinking about starting a new career or trying out something new, the first thing that I recommend is that they spend some time getting to know the market for that field and that position. And that's easy to do. There's a lot of really great resources on the web about that. One that I really love, and I'm sure you probably use it too, is mynextmove.org. So it's just an easier way of using occupational data that the Bureau of Labor Statistics gathers. So it gives you a lot of information about the knowledge, skills, and abilities that are used in that particular career path, some salary data, and educational information. But what I think that stuff is really valuable for is it allows you to look at especially the knowledge, skills, and abilities, and to recognize like what do you have and where do you have gaps, because it's really filling in those gaps is what makes you marketable. So just going to school isn't enough. Anytime you just go to school for something, there's always going to be that gap that employers perceive whenever they're working with you. So if you can identify the ways that you're building the skills and building the knowledge and building the abilities that are required for the role, you'll be able to explain them better to employers, and that's going to help you be able to be more successful and more marketable.
Okay, that a lot of what you're saying reminds me so much of the tech field where I am working with web developers and programmers, and it's like people advertise these jobs as if they are a magic bullet. Like you do a course, you'll make 20 are $100,000, a year, you're going to be living high on the hog. When a lot of times it's more than just like, here's a course, do a thing. But they're often really put like that everybody can do it, everybody should do it. If you're like me and you have a history degree, people like to throw it in your face and be like, oh, if you were a nurse, blue, blue, blue. And it's like, first off, if I was a nurse, I'd be passing out because I don't like blood. People would get the wrong IVs. I'd be making jokes when people are no, it'd be like MASH. That is not where you want me. But I digress. But when we're thinking about folks who might have gone into this field, maybe thinking that there were opportunities, or maybe not quite knowing exactly what they were looking for, let's kind of switch it to life after healthcare, or like kind of like when you're trying to figure out what you want to do. You mentioned earlier that doctors, nurses, those sort of types, it's not that they fell out of love with the profession, it's not that they're apathetic, but they're burnt out and stressed out. I worked as a librarian at a medical school with doctors, nurses, and I would watch these just poor souls studying, and it was like the knowledge that they were trying to get, it's like trying to drink from a fire hose. Like, and I would see them like kind of like aging like people do when they're like the president. Like, remember how young Obama was, and then he was like walking with a cane when he left. That's kind of what it was like watching them. Like, how does it feel as a coach? Like, what are some of the things that you find really common from like doctors down to occupational therapists when it comes to realizing they need to switch things up in their career?
Yeah, I think, you brought up a really good point. The people who complete, especially the professional programs, so PT, OT, MD, even RN, and some of the other professional programs, they don't lack grit. They know how to get it done. They know how to make sacrifices. They know how to really double down and get things done. And I think in some ways, they get really used to over relying on that skill, because like you said, when they're in school, or they're in residency, or they're in their internships, or however they're practicing, the hard work is really how they become successful. And I'll tell you, Sammy, the people that I work with are successful. They are doing really great work, and it's just draining them, and they just don't love it anymore. And so, where we start is we talk about, well, what else do you do? Like, what isn't fitting about this right now? What are your work values? How have they changed over time? And what's going on in your life, and how has that impacted what you're doing? And that's where we start. And the reason I start there is because um, people have an opinion that healthcare is a little bit more rigid than it is. So I have an RN, so I'm going to go be an RN. And that means floor nursing, because most clinics are staffed by LPNs. Or if I want to go back to school, I can, and I can be a nurse anesthetist, or I can get my APRN, and I can work as a nurse practitioner. And so they tend to think about it in terms of like, okay, well, if I want to do something different, I need to go back to school, and I need to change what I'm doing. But actually, those skills they develop and those skills that they use are really valuable all over the place. So even though they may not be interested in doing, traditional floor nursing in a hospital where they're working 12-hour days in med surg or any of things like that, there are still opportunities for them that will still utilize their RN degree, that will still use the skills that they're developing in patient care, will still give them those experiences with patients, that will still allow them to use the career progress that they've made, but that don't require them to go back to school. And I think that's the trick, is figuring out what are those things in your area, how do you make yourself marketable toward them, and then how do you make that jump and that leap.
Do you ever suggest that your clients do like just like something really wacky. Like I don't work with healthcare professionals, but I have a friend who's a nurse practitioner and she was burnt out with her work. So since, she's in Arizona, she randomly decided I'm going to spend, the summer working in the Grand Canyon. So she ended up working in the Grand Canyon at some sort of like random like hospital on the rim, just like waiting in case somebody falls off a donkey, I guess. But I've also seen people who are like working on cruise ships. I've known people who have gone on oil rigs. Like it's you when you said that it's not as rigid, there is some like random opportunities out there for people, on the whole spectrum of the healthcare field.
Yes.
One person wanted to go to Antarctica, and they do have jobs there in
I
Antarctica.
know, right?
Wouldn't that be nuts? You can be like the snow nurse.
Yeah, no thanks to me. I'm not one that loves that. But yeah, I mean it really I don't tell people what they need to do, right? Because everyone's experience of work is different, and what they need from work is different, and not all fulfillment comes from work. You have to have other things in your life too. So really, I look at it more from a perspective of like, okay, what do you need in your life? What do you need in your job? How do we get what you need in your job? And yes, absolutely, all of those options that you just mentioned are 100% legitimate. And if I had a client that was interested in doing them, I would be really excited because that would be really fun.
Yeah, and like I wonder if like, you're on the cruise ship, like does your career coach get a discount? Like maybe hook me up, buddy. Let's do this Carnival cruise. Okay, now that I've gone on a tangent, hoping like, some nurse is gonna go be an intrepid like cruise ship, nurse or something like that. So when you're working with these folks and you're kind of building them kind of up again and trying to figure out what they're doing, what is like a common challenge that they have when they are trying to like get out of healthcare? Do they get any pushback from employers or from like family members? Because, I assume if your mom has been bragging to her friends for the last 15 years, oh, my son's a doctor. And now it's like, my son wants to be a novelist. Like where do you go from there?
you know, everybody's family situation's different, but I think that the biggest challenge that people face is just not really any different than anyone else. Like job searching is just difficult. It's heartbreaking. Like you get really excited about a job and you go in and you interview and then you get rejected. And that's really hard. And I think that is probably the biggest thing that is challenging about the job search process is that it's not ever as short as people want it to be. Really a good job search in general takes at least 4 months. But especially when you're looking at changing industries, most of my clients are working with me from anywhere from that 4 month mark to the 9 or 10 month mark. And, most of them find work between like 6 and 8 months. But that's a long time to be doing things that you don't really like, and then also to be doing all these extra job search tasks that do take time. And obviously, one of the reasons my clients work with me is because I help cut that down, that time down for them, and I help them be strategic about it so they're not spending hours and hours every week working on their job search. But that's why. I think that's the thing that's the most difficult for them. It's just that it is a difficult process, and nobody likes getting rejection.
Is there anything that's like different between like applying for a job in healthcare as opposed to applying for just like a regular job? Because I assume that there might be some differences, whether it's like, in the interview or the resume or the application. Is there any differences for the folks who are listening if they're considering a jump either into healthcare or out of healthcare? What should they kind of look out for as a difference between these two hiring processes?
That's a little difficult for me to answer because I primarily just work in healthcare medicine and science. So I'm not really all that familiar with like your world, which is in IT, or some of those other higher volume professions. But I think healthcare it has a really unique rhythm to it, and that for example, there's kind of a hiring season for RNs when they're in school. So, like, starting in about January, all the new RN nurse positions are opened. You apply for them, you interview, and usually you have your offer by March, but the nurses won't complete their NCLEX, which is their licensing exam, until June. So there's kind of a ebb and flow of that. And then most people don't change jobs very often once they get into it in healthcare. So, people are typically in their jobs for a pretty reasonable amount of time. And what that means is that, there's not as many openings, and you have to be a little bit more patient, I think. And especially when we're talking about some of those non-traditional roles, like, for example, I work with a lot of nurses who work for pharmaceutical companies, and those positions are really great, but there just aren't that many of them. And pharmaceutical companies are a little bit more vulnerable in terms of employment. So there's a lot of movement, but there's just not, it's very cyclical. So it's hard to say, like, oh, I'm going to make this move and then just move, and then there's going to be a lot of opportunity, because there's just not as much movement within the field. And I think there are some new things that are happening in healthcare recruitment that I think are really cool. Like, there's a lot more push to have, like, the pre-screen interviews done as a part of the application process. So I know a lot of hospitals are going to that, especially for RNs and new RNs, is that you have to complete a pre-screen interview as part of the application. And so there's some little nuances like that. Probably the only other real important nuance is that with the resume, it's not important that it's pretty. So you don't need to have a graphic design or beautiful resume. The most important thing is just that the information is really easy to find, and that people can scan it pretty quickly.
No, that is fabulous to hear, Melissa, because there are some differences, like with tech, like it's seen as like unambitious if you stay in a company for more than 5 years. People are like, what?
Right.
Like, why were you there for so long? And they do want your resume to have a little bit of prettiness if you're some sort of designer. And with tech, like people are hiring all the time. So no, this is really good stuff, because you make it sound like with nurses, it's almost like an NFL draft. Like, here's the time, we're getting drafted, you're going to go take your car, oh, wow, you're at Mercy General, and like, ooh, good luck, Cindy, next round.
Yeah, well, and actually, MDs are exactly like an NFL draft. So they go through their application for residency, and then they go out on interviews, and they go on at least like 11 interviews, and then they submit their rankings, and then the places that they interview submit the rankings, and then there's some back algorithm that figures out where everybody's going, and then it spits it out on match day in March. So yeah, it is very much like that.
Oh my gosh. No, we need to have like a fantasy doctor league now, apparently. Okay, I love it. I love it, Melissa. I feel like you've been giving me a lot of interesting insights into the healthcare field, and I think a lot of stuff for, the folks listening to the podcast to really chew on, whether they want to go into the field or they want to go out of the field. Because I think it's important for folks who are considering a job field to think about why some people leave, because you always want to think about the fact that every career chapter could be temporary. But now that we've talked about that, how about you give us like if there's one sort of action tip or piece of advice that you feel like the folks listening should take from this interview, or one last word of wisdom. Lay it on us. Let us know what we need to know from you, Melissa.
Oh, what a question. I think probably the biggest piece of advice I would give anybody, regardless of their current profession, is that there's just no reason to go to a job every day that you don't love. So obviously you get paid for a reason. There's always going to be things you don't enjoy about your work. If you enjoyed it all, they wouldn't have to pay you. But there's just no reason to get up every day and psych yourself up so that you can go to work. There's no reason to live for vacations and weekends only. Work is a part of life and it should fit your life. And if you are in that situation where work has become a drudgery, and you are worried that either you can't make that much money somewhere else, or that job searching can be a fearful or scary thing, my best piece of advice would be, take the leap of faith, because I promise you that whenever you're working in a job that fits your life better, you really, really don't know how you ever did it any other way.
I love that, Melissa. This is great advice, I think, for any occupation. So thank you again for sharing your time and your insight and your wisdom. And I know that there's folks who have been listening who are like, man, I like the cut of this Melissa's coat. Where do I find out more? So let us know, where can we find you on the web? And I know that you're cooking up some new things for your clients and for your audience. So how about you lay it on us?
Yeah, so the name of my company is LBD Careers, and it stands for Life by Design. So you can find me on the web at lbdcareers.com. And I have new stuff up on the website all the time. You can also find me on LinkedIn. And so those are probably the two places that you can find me best. One of the things that I have going on right now is that I do have an ability for you to book a strategy session with me. So my strategy sessions are 1 hour, and you can book them on my website or by contacting me at LinkedIn. And those strategy sessions are all about helping you figure out, what are your work values? What should you be looking for in a job? What kinds of questions should you be asking whenever you're looking at applying? How do you tailor your application documents so that you're a stronger choice? What kind of keyword searches do you need to be setting up so that you can cut time off of your job searching? All of that is covered in the strategy session, and it's no obligation. So if you do the strategy session with me and you want to walk away and work the plan, then you can do so with my blessing. And then if you do have a more complicated search, or you need a little bit more assistance from me in that, I do have coaching programs that you can complete with me after the strategy session. But strategy sessions are the first way to get involved with me. So if you're interested, you're welcome to reach out to me either on my website or on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Melissa, for being on my show today. I've certainly enjoyed it. I hope that you had a fun time educating me, because Lord knows all I know is what I've seen on Shonda Rhimes shows. So this is eye-opening.
Well, thank you very much. Also, I really had a great time this morning chatting with you, and I look forward to collaborating with you more in the future.
Yay! Thank you again, Melissa, and thank you all for listening. As always, I'm Sami Gardner, and this is the Career Kickstart Show. Bye!
Change your career, change your life at CareerKickstartAcademy.com.